Hi, my name is Gene Shu again. I am founder of EME China Consultants, and my job is to help you, especially if you're an American, to understand how to navigate the cultural complexities of doing business in China. And a couple days ago, I posted a video where I made some commentary on a debate between Trish Regan of Fox Business and Liu Xing of the Chinese state-owned media. And they were talking obviously about this upcoming trade war. And what I want to show is that I was surprised. Well, maybe I wasn't that surprised, but I received a lot of comments. And I first want to illustrate that these comments are not productive to the goals that I'm trying to help everybody achieve. And that's basically, how do we as Americans engage the Chinese in a way that is more constructive and more productive and ultimately more beneficial towards achieving our business objectives when we are doing business in China. So the unproductive and negative comments actually come from both sides. Here's one where it just basically flat out says Liu Xing is lying. So I don't know what is the benefit or value of posting a comment like that. And then, of course, here's another one that basically says Trish is trash. So this is the type of rhetoric that really doesn't help the dialogue between our two countries move forward. So I missed the live debate yesterday, but I found a replay of it on Fox News, and I'm going to listen to it, and I'm going to comment on it. And I want to encourage all of you to try to make some constructive comments. Now, even though I may be critical of Trish as the anchor and the moderator of her show, I do it only in the context to give Americans kind of an insight into how certain words and certain ways of framing issues actually is not constructive to having a real dialogue. All right, so I'm going to go to this.
Tonight, I have a special guest joining me all the way from Beijing, China, to discuss the challenges of trade between the U.S. and her home country. She's the host of a primetime English language television program overseen by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And though she and I may not agree on everything, I believe this is actually a really unique opportunity, an opportunity to hear a very different view. Now, as these trade negotiations stall out, it's helpful to know how the Chinese Communist Party is thinking about trade and about the United States. Now, in the interest of transparency, I should explain that I don't speak for anyone but myself as the host of a Fox Business show. My guest, however, is part of the CCP, and that's fine. As I said, I welcome different perspectives on this show. With all that in mind, I'm very pleased tonight to welcome Ms. Liu Xing, host of the Primetime Opinion program, The Point with Liu Xing, to Trish Regan Primetime tonight. Now, just quickly to the viewers, please bear with me.
Okay, so before she goes any further, this is one of those situations where I think she's trying to narrate this debate or interview before it even gets started. So she's framed Liu Xing as the mouthpiece of the Chinese government, and she emphasized that it's the Communist Party of China, as if that's really relevant to having a quote-unquote honest debate. So for all of you Americans who are doing business in China, and I'm an American who has done a lot of business in China, this kind of rhetoric isn't constructive. And, it's not that I'm not proud to be an American, and it's not that I don't have views against what the Chinese government is doing to different areas of the world. It's just certain rhetoric doesn't help the conversation actually move forward.
With us, as we have a significant time delay in our satellites between Beijing and the U.S., and because of that, we're going to do our very best not to speak over each other. But Xin, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Trish, for having me. It's a great opportunity for me, unprecedented. I never dreamed that I would have this kind of opportunity to speak to you and to speak to many audiences in ordinary households in the United States.
Yeah, it is indeed unprecedented.
Which
Hang on,
I need to correct. I need to correct
I'm
because
ask you. I'm going to jump in. I guess our satellites
I
are
am
getting
not.
kind of
I am
weird.
not.
But tell me, yeah, forgive me. You are not what?
Yeah. Trish, I have to get it straight. I am not a member of the Communist Party of China. This is on the record. So please don't assume that I'm a member and I don't speak for the Communist Party of China. And I'm here for today. I'm only speaking for myself as Liu Xin, a journalist working for CGTN. So if anybody wants to quote me or anything, please put my name there at least. Okay.
Okay, appreciate it. What's your...
Yeah, so so this interview and this discussion really didn't get off on a very positive note. And so the goal of any conversation, if you are trying to reach an agreement or you're trying to collaborate and you're trying to do business, is to actually create a set of conditions where both sides can actually have their viewpoints heard. And I think what Trish did was she immediately put Liu Xing on the defensive by kind of stating that or hinting or suggesting that she was somehow the mouthpiece of the Chinese government. And that kind of framing really just makes this almost kind of like just a one-sided kind of show where she is obviously just talking to her viewers and her audience who obviously love her, but if anybody really wants to understand how both sides can have a quote-unquote honest debate, this is definitely not a way to get that started.
Of where the trade talks actually are right now. Do you believe, give me your current assessment of where we are on these trade talks. Do you believe a deal is possible?
It is true that the satellite connection is not very good, but I believe that you're asking me where we are in terms of the trade negotiations. I don't know. I don't have any insider information. What I knew was the talks were not very successful last time they were going on in the United States, and now I think both sides are considering what to go next. But I think the Chinese government has made its position very clear that unless the United States treat the Chinese government, treat the Chinese negotiating team with respect and show the willingness to talk without using outside pressure, there is high possibility that there could be a productive trade deal. Otherwise, I think we might be facing a prolonged period of problems for both sides.
And I would stress that trade wars are never good. They're not good for anyone. So I want to believe. I want to believe that something can get done. And these are certainly challenging times. I realize there's a lot of rhetoric out there, but let me turn to one of the biggest issues, and that's intellectual property rights. I mean, fundamentally, I think we can all agree it's never right to take something that's not yours. And yet, in going through so many of these cases at the Independent World Trade Organization, the WTO, that China's a member of, as well as the DOJ and FBI cases, you can actually see some of them on the screen right now. There's evidence there that China has stolen enormous amounts of intellectual property, hundreds of billions of dollars worth. Now, that's a lot of money, but truly, I guess we shouldn't really care if it's hundreds of billions of dollars or just 50 cents. How do American businesses operate in China if they're at risk for having their property, their ideas, their hard work stolen?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a question that Trish should be asking American businesses, because American businesses who are operating in China are doing extremely well. In fact, the largest, most iconic American company, which is Apple, currently derives more sales and revenue from China than perhaps any other country other than its own. So you should ask that question to Tim Cook, how he operates in China and how he creates such value for the American shareholders for operating in China. Asking a news anchor is really probably not the right way to have a constructive debate.
Well, I think, Trish, you have to ask American businesses whether they wanted to come to China, whether they find coming to China and cooperating with Chinese businesses has not been profitable or not, and they will tell you their answers. As far as I understand, many American companies have been established in China, and they're very profitable, and the great majority of them, I believe, plan to continue to invest in China and explore the Chinese market. Well, now, U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff makes it a little bit more difficult, makes the future a little bit uncertain. I do not deny that there are IP infringement, there are copyright issues, or there are piracy, or even theft of commercial secrets. I think that is something that has to be dealt with, and I think the Chinese government and the Chinese people, and me as an individual, I think there's a consensus because without the protection of IP right, nobody, no country, no individual can be stronger, can develop itself. So I think that is a very clear consensus among the Chinese society. And of course, there are cases where individuals, where companies go and steal, and I think that's a common practice probably in every part of the world. And there are companies in the United States who sue each other all the time over infringement on IP rights. And you can't say, simply because these cases are happening, that America is stealing, or China is stealing, or the Chinese people are stealing. And basically, that's the reason why I wrote that rebuttal, because I think this kind of blanket statement is really not helpful, really not helpful.
Well, it's not just a statement, it's multiple reports, including...
Yeah, so that's a really tricky one. So you can actually see that Liu Xing is actually very well. She's actually very good. So the first thing she did was she didn't disagree with the assertions of Trish, which, as you can see on Trish's reaction, it makes it really hard to stay on the attack when you acknowledge the other side. So now, whether, whatever is going on in the background, I think that is a really, really good lesson and tactic to use in negotiations is instead of going straight into attacks or expressing your views, start by acknowledging what the other side said, and then it makes it harder for the dialogue to continue to go down a negative trajectory.
Evidence from the WTO, but let me ask you about Huawei, because that's certainly in the headlines right now.
Sure, I don't deny those. No, I don't deny those.
Right. I mean, look, I think, as I said, we can all agree that if you're going to do business with someone, it has to be based on trust. And you don't want anyone stealing your valuable information that you've spent decades working on. Anyway, China...
It has to be based on trust, that's true, but it has to be based on mutual trust, which means you have to not only care whether American businesses or Americans can trust the Chinese, but you also should care whether the Chinese and Chinese businesses can trust Americans, because any type of relationship, it goes in both directions. And I want to make sure that people understand that trust is important, but trust is important in both directions.
China passed a law in 2017 requiring tech companies to work with the military and the government. So it's not just individual companies, right, that might be getting access to this technology. It's the government itself, which is an interesting nuance. But I get that China is upset that Huawei is not being welcomed into the U.S. markets. I totally get it. So let me just ask you this. It's an interesting way to think about it. I think, what if we said, hey, sure, Huawei, come on in. But here's the deal. You must share all those incredible technological advances that you've been working on. You got to share it with us. Would that be okay?
I think it is, if it is through cooperation, if it is through mutual learning, if it is through, if you pay for the use of this IP, of this high technology, I think it's absolutely fine. Why not? We all prosper because we learn from each other. I learned English because I had American teachers. I learned English because I had American friends. I still learn how to do journalism because I have American copy editors or editors. So I think that's fine so long as it is not illegal. I think everybody should do that, and that's how you get better, right?
But you mentioned something pretty important, which is that you should pay for the acquisition of that. And, you know, look, I think that the liberalized economic world in which we live has valued intellectual property, and it's governed by a set of laws. And so we all need to kind of play by the rules and play by those laws if we're going to have that kind of trust between each other. But I think you bring up some good points. Let me turn to China right now, which is now, wow, the second largest economy. At what point will China decide to abandon its developing nation status and, well, stop borrowing from the World Bank?
Well, I think this kind of discussion is going on, and I've heard very live discussions about this, and indeed, there are people talking about China already becoming so big. Why don't you just grow up? Basically, I think you said it in your program as well, China grow up. Well, I think we want to grow up. We don't want to be, dwarfed or poor, underdeveloped all the time. But it depends on how you define developing country, right? If you look at China's overall size, the overall size of the Chinese economy, yes, we are very big, the world's #1. But don't forget, we have 1.4 billion people. That is over 3 times the population of the United States. So if you divide the second largest overall economy in the world, basically, when it comes down to per capita GDP, we're I think less than 1/6 of that of the United States, and even less than some other more developed countries in Europe. So you tell me, where should we put ourselves? This is a very complicated issue because per capita, as I said, is very small, but overall it's very big. So we can do a lot of big things, and people are looking upon us to do much more around the world. So I think we are doing that. We're contributing to the United Nations. We are the world's biggest contributor to the UN peacekeeping missions, and we're giving out donations and humanitarian aids and all of that because we know we have to grow up. And Trish, thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, that was actually a really good question, but unfortunately, it really just makes this kind of interview have nothing to do with a debate because neither side really is really listening to what the other side is saying and trying to find common ground. It just seems like both sides are just trying to get the other side to admit something. And so, the lesson for business for all of you Americans who go to China for business is when you go to China for business, you go there because there are opportunities. And the rules that we are comfortable working under, which is now basically the worldwide rules that most countries are following, these are rules that basically America has written, especially the ones that deal with intellectual property. And the rules always change because no set of rules is perfect. And that is one of the things that we have to keep in mind. There are a current set of rules that America is mostly responsible for writing. And then you have countries that are coming into this quote unquote rules-based system. And the question is, how do we adapt the rules to make it more palatable for countries who may not share similar values as we do? And we weren't going to get into the discussion on this, but that's one of the biggest challenges.
Let's get to the tariffs. I've seen some of your commentaries too. And Shin, I appreciate that you think China could lower some of its tariffs. I watched you say that, and I'm totally in agreement with you. In 2016, the average tariff, effectively a tax, that was charged on an American good in China was 9.9%. And that was nearly 3 times what the US was charging. So what do you say about this? What do you think about saying, hey, the heck with these tariffs. Let's get rid of them altogether. Would that work?
I think that would be a wonderful idea. I mean, don't you think for American consumers, products from China would be even cheaper? And for consumers in China, products from America would be so much cheaper too. I think that would be a wonderful idea. I think we should work towards that. But you know, you talked about rule-based system, rule-based order. This is the thing. If you want to change the rules, it has to be done in mutual consensus. Basically, when you talk about tariffs, it is not just between China and the United States. I understand if you lower tariff between China and the United States, the Europeans will come, the Japanese will come, the Venezuelans probably will come and say, hey, we want the same tariff. You can't discriminate, you know, between countries. So it is a very complicated settlement to reach, and I think the last agreement that China and the about trade, yes, I'm talking about tariffs. And I think the last time when the world agreed on the kind of tariff reduction China should commit to was exactly the result of multilateral and years of difficult negotiations. The United States saw in its interest and decided to what degree they can agree or to what degree they can lower their tariff. Nobody put a gun at their head. And China agreed to, although with some difficulties, to lower our tariff considerably. It is all the decision of countries according to their own self-interest. Now, things are different. Yes, I agree. 20 years later, what are we going to do? Maybe these old rules need to be changed. You know what? Let's talk about it. Let's do it according to the rules, the same rules. And if you don't like the rules, we'll change the rules. But again, it has to be a multinational, a multilateral decision
I would
process.
just say, you know, you can go back to the trade agreement of 1974, Section 301. There is a rule that enables the United States to use tariffs to try and influence the behavior of China should it be stealing our intellectual property. And that, I think, in some ways is part.
Wow, that something in the WTO in 1976, that it just shows that you know, the research that the Fox News Channel has done is just pulling things from everywhere that don't really seem to be directly related to the whole conversation. I think the whole conversation was how can we resolve and end the trade war? You know, I don't think this is helping any positive dialogue, and let's just see what happens.
Part of what this all comes back to, and it's this sense of trust. And I hear you on the forced technology transfer, and I think that some American companies perhaps have made some mistakes in terms of being willing to overlook what they might have to give up in the near term. But this is an issue, I think, where the country as a whole needs to step in, and we're seeing the United States do that, perhaps in a way that hasn't happened. I mean, it's been in the background. Don't get me wrong. I think previous administrations have identified the challenge, but have really been a little unwilling to take it on. So we're living in these very different times. How do you define state capitalism?
You mean, how do I define? Sorry, I didn't hear the last thing. You mean forced technology transfer, or so-called
state
forced
capitalism.
technology transfer?
No. Well, I guess forced technology transfer may be part of that, but state capitalism. In other words, one of the things that I would
technology transfer, and somehow you kind of skid it away.
I'm playing you a compliment here. Hang on one second, Shin. I want to say that I think your system of economics is very interesting because you have a capitalist system, right? But it's state run. So talk to us about that. How do you define it?
Well, we would like to define a socialism with Chinese characteristics where market forces are expected to play the dominating or the deciding role in the allocation of resources. Basically, let the market. We want it to be a market economy, but there are some Chinese characteristics. For instance, some state-owned enterprises which are playing an important but increasingly smaller role, maybe in the economy. And everybody thinks that China's economy is state-owned, everything is state-controlled, everything is state. But let me tell you, it is not the true picture. If you look at the statistics, for instance, 80% of Chinese employees were employed by private enterprises. 80%. 80% of Chinese exports were done by private companies, were produced by private companies. About 65% of technological innovation were carried out by private enterprises. The largest some of the largest companies that affect our life, for instance, some internet companies or some 5G technology companies, they are private companies. So we are, yes, a socialist economy with Chinese characteristics, but it's, not everything state controlled, state run. It's not like that. We are actually quite mixed and very dynamic and actually very, very open as well.
Yeah, I think I think while that was very well said and it may be quote unquote factually accurate, I think it's a little bit misleading. So I think the real context of whether you're a state-owned enterprise in China or a private company in China like a Alibaba or a Tencent is that all Chinese companies, whether they're publicly traded or they're private or they're state-owned, they all have to follow Chinese laws. Okay, that is the biggest difference between what Trish is trying to say is that it's the Chinese laws and the lack of transparency in the enforcement of Chinese laws, and that really concern Western businesses. And so it's fact. So this is an area where things can be factually true, but presented in a way that's actually misleading. So I think that was actually a valuable piece of information.
Well, I think you need to probably keep being open. I think that as a free trade person myself, I think that's the direction to pursue. And ultimately, that leads to greater economic prosperity for you and better economic prosperity for us. And so then you get a win-win. But
absolutely,
this was interesting. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you want to have a discussion in the future, we can do that. If you want to come to China,
I'd love it.
You're welcome, and I'll take you around. Thank you, Trish, for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Okay, look, I would just say, as I told Shin, no one wants a trade war, but we have to think long and hard about the right next steps.
Yes, so no one wants a trade war. I think that's definitely true. The question is what I always talk about is what is controllable and what is not controllable. And if you want to avoid a trade war, I think I'm not really in a position to give advice to the current Trump administration on how to negotiate with China, but I just want to say, generally speaking, if you now treat China as an equal, then I think you have to adjust how you frame different things, and that is probably the mistake that most Americans make when they do business in China. They assume that the rules that were written mainly by Americans and Western democracies somehow would be something that the Chinese also aspire to kind of live by or follow. And so it becomes more of a preaching session, which you could obviously see in this kind of discussion, rather than a real opportunity for the two sides to make compromise. And anyway, it's just very, very interesting. I think I've probably made more criticism towards the American side, the Fox News side, but I don't do that because I disagree with the position that America takes. What I disagree with is the manner in which certain people try to achieve their objectives with regards to doing business in China or achieving compromise in China or trying to end a trade war with China. I don't really disagree with any of the facts and the things that are negative to Americans and American businesses. What I disagree with is the way that it's presented. When you force people into a corner where there is no way out, then basically you're not going to get a good deal. And so again, I would love to hear your comments, but I would also love it if we tried to make constructive comments. So for example, I'm an American, so I try to make more comments that are critical of our side in the hopes that that will bridge the dialogue with somebody on the Chinese side. And there's a lot of negative comments coming from the Chinese side too. So I encourage the people on the Chinese side to also really try to listen to the American side and not go on the attack of Fox News or Trish Regan. You have to remember, this is not really state-to-state level negotiations. This is news, and news is entertainment, and you have to entertain the people who are watching your news. So just like Chinese state-owned news needs to take a position that the majority of Chinese will be happy to hear, every news organization also needs to kind of present things to their constituencies. And in the case of Fox Business or Fox News, that's mainly supporters of the current president's current approach. So we always have to put those things into context, okay? So hopefully we'll get some more productive comments with this video. And so thank you very much.